Okay, before we start, short raise of hands. Who here is a developer? It's a lot. Okay. How many of you work with data or AI? Some of them. Okay. How many of you have thought about ethics and bias and things in your work? Okay, that's good. It's always a little bit tricky with these kind of talks when you don't know who's going to be the audience, because some people, don't have anything to do with neither AI nor ethics. Some people are like already super into the topic and want to know like all the details, nooks and crannies. And I kind of hope I'm going to sit somewhere in between. It also might be a little bit different of a talk because I am probably going to make you feel worse afterwards. And I'm not going to present solutions. Because that's what we've been trying for the last couple of years, and it's not really been working. And I talk a little bit more about the nature of ethics and why those approaches haven't been working. Okay, so let's get started. So you want to develop ethical AI. Maybe that's why you're here. A little bit about me and why I am on this stage talking about it, because I am not a developer. I'm not working with code at all. I am an AI and ethics researcher. I just got my PhD from the University of Copenhagen in human-centered computing. And I'm now an AI ethics consultant and postdoc researcher as well. Prior to academia, I've been a co-founder and head of design at a design and tech studio. So I have been working with technology and with developers for a long time before entering research, especially for emerging technologies and expert systems in fields like renewable energy, fintech, health tech, smart homes. A lot of the fields where AI is now a big topic. Aside from that, I'm also a massive nerd. I like to study, and I've been studying it just across the section for a long time on the side. And turns out all of these things somehow always tie back into how we develop technology. So that's why I'm here. I want to start with this really old grainy photo of cars and bridges. This photo is from the 1930s. It shows bridges that have been built around New York in that time by an architect that was really, really renowned for his architectural, urban style. And I don't know if you can recognize, but these bridges were very low. And these bridges were all the way on the highways that were newly built that were leading to the beach. And it only appeared after a year or two that these bridges were actually too low to let buses pass through. So it was only cars that had access to the beach. Which in turn was actually somewhat intentional by this architect, because it meant that only people who could afford cars had access to the beach, which meant in practice, especially at that time, it was mostly for white people. And this triggered a huge discussion around how infrastructures we build across many corners always express the politics of the people who are involved in building them. Of course, the infrastructures, especially around cars that are built around those time, still influence a lot of how we experience the cities that we live in right now. Why is that connected to AI or data? Data, in general, is an infrastructure, and informs actually quite a lot of the public and also shared ecosystems that we use to navigate. This is a picture of Amsterdam by night. And this is a picture that was used in a project that I've worked on with the city of Amsterdam. And the AI team has been working on a system for smart lights, smart city lights. As you can see, the lights are scattered very different, does that work? Yes. As you can see, obviously lights are much more centered here and sparse more around here. So they definitely follow kind of where where the cars are and where the streets are. So this kind of decision-making still informs our infrastructure today. These smart traffic lights or street lights had the idea that if we put sensors in them and we know when they're broken, then we can maintain them easier and faster and better. And that will be more efficient and better services for everybody involved. However, it turns out that the city center has much more lights with much more sensors that were reported broken much more often, creating a feedback loop that the maintenance for them in the city center would be checked much more often, leading to a very much higher maintenance cost and effort in the city center, and not around the city, parts of the city around them where much poorer people live. We have this saying for data, like what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets measured. So obviously, if you only have the data for a certain part of the city, you can only maintain that, and the rest of it you can't measure, so you can't maintain it. And again, the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure actually informed the infrastructure for the data that was there. This is a very practical story from a team that was very well intended about building systems inspired by narratives of like the super connected smart city, trying to do good, realizing they were reinforcing something that the city has been struggling with for a long time. And these kind of stories around how data and AI algorithms are being used keep popping up, have been popping up across the last few years. So 2024 has been called by like MIT Technology the year of AI everything. Like you could literally walk through the city and every kind of like, no worries, poster said like, okay, now has AI in it. This now has AI in it. A sticker on everything. So here I need to shortly mention what I mean when I say AI, because it does need to be acknowledged that even though it's been around for a long time, there's actually no general consensus, also not in technical experts groups, what qualifies as AI. So for the sake for this conversation, I adopt the following definition, and this is the only time that I have to check my speaker notes. Referring to computational systems that interpret external data, learn from such data, and use those learnings to achieve specific goals and tasks through flexible adoption. That is still pretty broad. Mostly AI is very, or what we consider AI today, is very advanced pattern recognition in more or less well-maintained databases. But while there has been like these extremely hopeful stories, particularly this year, about AI being integrated in like healthcare, self-driving cars, financial services, energy optimization, everything, we have actually been for the last 10 years, more or less, continuous stream of these kind of algorithms gone wrong, which started with a massive crisis delivery on Compass that was like sentencing Black people in the US much more than white people in 2016, and has been like pretty much going through in the news reporting to like this year with generative AI pushing bots, intentional misinformation for yesterday's election. These are a couple of like points that I often use for my research to refer to, but these are just kind of like my favorite things of AI going wrong. If you want to see more and have fun, I can very much recommend the AIAC repository, which tracks like all kind of incidents and issues that have been reported in different studies and research and media across all different years. And you can see 2024 has been busy. So whatever kind of like specialized AI system you're working on, you can probably find somebody who already fucked something in that regards up in here for knowing what not to do. So this kind of wave or rise in issues, incidents, has led to firing conversations around ethical AI. If we can just figure out how to do this ethical, then we'll be good. Then none of this will happen anymore. If it only were so easy. So what do we actually mean when we talk about ethics? Mostly ethics, actually, and I'm going to get a little bit conceptual here, is moral philosophy. Moral philosophy going back until like Socrates, so thousands of years, trying to figure out what a good life is and how to live a good life. And I'm sorry to say, since Socrates and even before, we have not found the answer. There are various ethical frameworks that deliver very different answers to the questions of how a good life looks, how somebody lives a good life. And depending on which framework you actually apply, you might make very different decisions and end up in a very different place. And that is the point about it. Ethics are frameworks that are being applied in order to make decisions. All of us continuously use internalized value systems in order to make decisions about what the right thing is to do. So even though we are not necessarily aware of it, we are trying to live a good life. So every day I make ethical decisions, you make ethical decisions when you choose to buy like fair trade coffee or not, eat meat more or less, whatever, take the bus, take the car. You apply an internal process of what it is that you value and which kind of action actually aligns with that value. So figuring out the ethics is not actually that straightforward. But if we talk about AI, mostly we don't actually talk about ethics that much. We talk about all of these kind of aspects that are being used to describe what an ethical AI might be. It should be trustworthy, it should be responsible, transparent, safe, secure, explainable, compliant, fair, reliable, sustainable. All of these things describe very different ways of saying it should not do wrong in whatever way. These kind of, these parts generally can be summarized under a principled approach to ethics. Basically, if our conduct follows specific principles, then we will be fine, then we will be good. And there have been a lot of AI principles in the last few years, a lot. Since 2016, I think the AI principles database has tracked around like 200, 300 different sets. The issue with high-level principles is that there is actually a huge gap between the normative stance that they kind of preach and the actual application of what it means in practice when we want to live by these principles. I'm going to explain a little bit why. The one thing is that very often in these kind of lists of principles, they're too strict to actually be applicable, or they're too soft to be reliable. So either they're so concrete that they basically keep you from doing anything in the specific situation that they're in, or don't feel applicable in the situation that you're in, or they're so general that basically you can do anything and still tell a specific story in how this complies with this principle. Therefore, quite a bit of research has actually proven that these kinds of principles don't really have any kind of impact by asking the people who are supposed to implement these, developers. Here, question. Does anybody of you know any of AI principles, lists, or guidelines and is trying to work with them? Specifically the ones who have raised their hands when they said they think about AI ethics. No? Okay, interesting. The thing is that in order to work, principles require quite a lot of work by the people who are expected to apply them. So for one, principles require selectivity. So if we would go back, I'm not going to go back and tap all the way because it's a lot of tapping, but to all the black balls that I had there before, you actually can't deliver on all principles at the same time. You have to choose a specific set, and you have to stand by that selection. For example, inclusivity. And if you choose inclusivity for a specific point, you will have to reckon with the fact that probably you're not going to be fair. Because fairness does not always include everybody to the same extent. So you need to be exclusive. Or you want to be transparent. Transparency actually inherently is in tension with privacy, or very often also security and safety. So you need to like value one over the other. That means you need to engage in trade-offs. You need to say, all right, we are not going to value transparency that much, but therefore we can deliver on security, or the other way around. But that also means that it requires a whole lot of pragmatic realism about the situation in which you're in, and actually very much specifying in this particular context that you're developing right now, this is a more important principle to follow and another one is not. Which also demands a normative stance from the people involving them to say, nah, I'm not going to be inclusive. Who would feel good saying I'm not going to be inclusive? Nobody, because everybody wants to be really good and deliver on all of these really high level principles and ideals that are being asked from us through this. Great. Okay, so that is a principled approach. There is a different approach, the consequences approach. That is the one that is mostly being followed in regulation. So I hope some of you have seen this triangle, this pyramid. It's from the EU AI Act, the most recent, largest, most ambitious regulation to try to kind of regulate what AI is being used for. Also extremely wishy-washy and extremely difficult to apply. So they, and rather than saying like, okay, we want to be inclusive, fair, just, they classify risk. So certain systems dealing with specific parts are deemed like unacceptable risk. So no matter what the benefits are of using this, we also think that there was going to be harm triggered by that, so therefore we're not going to engage with this. Such as facial recognition, for example, dark pattern AI, even though I still need to find somebody in governance actually explain to me what dark pattern AI is. Also no idea why they think emotion recognition systems are limited risk. Like, no. But okay, they tried. But the thing is that in order to actually classify the risks of something that could go wrong, you need to anticipate the consequences and look towards the future. And there is a lot, oh, great. Well, imagine there are like 3 more pictures of tools, mostly cards or like little timelines saying like, okay, this is how you anticipate unintended consequences. This is how you look towards the future to see what could go wrong. There is one inherent issue with consequences and looking towards the future, which is where do you stop? How far is the circle that you draw around the consequences that you might consider as potential harmful or riskful, and how far into the future do you project? If anybody wants to talk about that afterwards, like long-termism or something, I'm very open to that, but that's a whole other rant. But also, these kind of approaches that look into consequences have a huge elephant in the room that probably everybody knows who works with data, which is bias. Which means that we are actually extremely unlikely to be able to anticipate the risks of a system simply because we are not used to thinking about systems that way. Since most of you are developers, I assume most of you know what bias in data systems is. Raise your hand if you don't. Excellent. Okay, we're going to go fast because I'm running out of time. So obviously there's explicit bias, which even though it has been around for a long time and people have discussed it a lot, and there are like a lot of tools to navigate bias in like different sizes of data sets. A whole lot of like research by the Artificial Intelligence Index report and by the AI Now Institute says like still in 2024, a whole lot of explicit bias exists in the most commonly used AI systems. This is pretty much a very common example from Midjourney that says like, well, if you ask it to show you an influential person, it's an old white dude with white hair and most likely wearing glasses. These are very explicit, very easy to see biases. They are not great, but they're pretty obvious. We also have implicit bias, which is much harder to track. For example, biases expressed in ambiguous grammar. The fact is the way we communicate and what we kind of expect from these systems to replicate is extremely socially fickle. So this is an example from a study done in 2022. So if we provide a prompt to a ChatGPT, explain the sentence, the doctor shouted at the nurse because she was late, it doesn't have a problem with it. It says the doctor shouted because he was upset because the nurse was running late, right? Seems pretty straightforward. Now what we're going to change is this one pronoun. Explain the sentence, the doctor shouted at the nurse because he was late. This sentence doesn't make sense. The doctor doesn't have a reason to shout at the nurse because he was late. The thing here is that the she, could be referring to the doctor or to the nurse. We only know from the context. There is no right or wrong in this sentence, which means we need social context to make sense of it. And of course, the system is going to choose the social context that it's mostly familiar with. There is no way we can catch these kind of ambiguous grammar if we actually want to stay true to some kind of social reality. This case doesn't work anymore. They fixed it. But yeah, it still existed in 2022. But the thing is that these kind of like identity biases are extremely difficult to track. So I assume a lot of you also know Gemini, where they actually tried to kind of eradicate any kind of like impact that protected identities have, which is like race, sex, gender, age, sexuality. So basically, they removed it from the definition of what the system could deliver and randomized it, creating these kind of pictures, which we all know are historically very inaccurate. And the whole thing also, well, gave a couple of more not so great pictures. The thing is that our history is not unbiased, and we don't want an unbiased history. Bias is always contextual, historical, and socially constructed. It also led to this example. It's embarrassingly hard to get Google Gemini to acknowledge that white people exist. Well, I wonder now he knows how it feels for everybody here prior. Sorry. So why this matters? Specifically for AI. First, these kind of biases are extremely tricky to actually test for in development. Currently, any kind of like this kind of quality assurance about biases in AI relies very heavily on communal activist work. Basically, tons of people running tons of test cases to find where exactly it breaks down. That means we won't know that something is wrong until somebody tells us that it's wrong, which means we first need to release something in the world, and then we're going to see when it breaks down how to fix it, which seems extremely reliable. But also the issue is that AI might understand equality when we randomize or anonymize or remove these kind of identity markers, but it doesn't understand equity, because equity, again, is something that's socially and historically and politically constructed. So social justice, social fairness are not things that we can actually in any way automate in any kind of like system that relies on historical data. In that sense, responsible realism, as is needed for the principles, is impossible without context. Which means there will always be failure. And those failures will always affect the same people first, those who already have the least equity. Because of this data structure, AI will always favor first a status quo, and then the people who are affected by the missing link will need to tell the people who are developing it that they are missing, which is a whole lot of extra work. Okay. Principles, consequences. So then there's actually a last thing to ethics, because the first two are about how to limit harm. But ethics is not only about harm. Ethics is also about purpose. Why do we build the things that we do? What do we actually value in the positive kind of ways, right? And And this is also a bigger discussion. I'm just going to talk about 2 small points using the best way of communication ever, comics. AI has been very much touted as a solution for efficiency, something that our market is absolutely obsessed with, making anything more efficient. The problem is, with people in general, that if we become more efficient and we have more time, we tend to fill it with more crap, not with the stuff that we actually want to do. So specifically, when we fit in efficiency everywhere, what we end up in is kind of a race that's never going to end, and where we're actually never going to benefit. So I'm just putting that out there. The second part is, of course, oh, that's really bad. Okay. Authenticity. Like, what do we do when we automate a whole lot of systems where human labor and human interactions or human communications are replaced by automated bots? Oftentimes, what we lose is specifically all the good and the bad with the of the human touch. Okay. So, as I said, I work with development teams and AI teams on these kind of questions. And I also kind of give them this rundown. And so these are some quotes that I've received when people start to actually dig more into the issues behind the parts that they're building. Like, we were so well-intentioned, and now in the end, I wonder, should we even be doing this? And here's a part where I'm sorry to tell you, there basically is no ethical practice and no ethical AI. I'm not saying that there aren't ways to do things better or worse, and I'll talk about that. But the thing is that this kind of assumption of like saying, okay, how can we build ethical AI, kind of assumes that there is an unethical AI. So ethical, unethical, which, as I mentioned before, there are a ton of different ethical frameworks. And the stuff that we're building right now, it conforms really well to an existing value framework, mostly capitalism. So it's totally ethical. It's totally in line with that ethics. All AI is ethical or unethical. Similar for ethical practice. We are all always already engaged in deciding what is the thing that we value most in this moment and acting apparently. So there's no one way to do it, and there's no ethical AI. So in that sense, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go through any kind of like more toolkits or cards or whatever and processes, methods, like this is how you solve it. Because what I suggest, based on my research, is that we actually need a new type of considering ethics, or what it is. First, considering ethics as something that's relational. So something that people figure out together, socially, with each other, within the teams and the organizations that they're in. Second, that it's very particular. So values or principles need to move from this universal idea to very particular manifestations of that ideal. That is labor that needs to be done by people in teams together. It needs to be contextual. Again, that is taking into account the social, political, and economical historical structures that actually enable you to do the work that you're currently doing. Because changing that will be extremely hard. And it's ongoing. It's not something that you can basically solve for one problem and then move on. Specifically, talking about the failures that pop up afterwards, it's an ongoing process of maintenance and responding to all the things that are inevitably going to go wrong. So what would a better practice then look like? How much time do I have? I still have time. Good. Cool. First, more moral awareness and ethical sensitivity. We've done a great job, a great first step now with me telling you, like giving you a little bit of an umbrella over where. Ethics is more than compliance, which means it's more than the risk assessment and saying, okay, we are adhering to what's legal. AI is never neutral, unbiased, or objective. And developing it will always involve ethical judgments. So considering that in everyday ongoing work contributes to this. Second, tools and best practices. Also, even though I've kind of like shed on the principles before, they are pretty much the one thing that we currently have. So knowing the tools that exist and knowing their limitations, very much knowing the limitations, still enables us to use them and apply them in a good way forward. However, all tools, all processes and methods can be screwed by the people that are applying them, which means you need to tailor processes to the organizations and the product in which this is. So that is kind of also why, after 3 years of researching ethics and practice when developing AI, I ended up not developing more tools, methods, or processes, because it just doesn't make sense to develop generalizable methods and processes, because every tool, every product, every team works in a different organization that requires a different contextualization of the processes, of the principles, and the consequences and risks that they're dealing with. And lastly, advocacy. Better practices actually depend on the people that are doing them, which ties to the relationality, not necessarily to the processes. Your intentions and your understanding of the context within which a project is delivered is much more important than the processes or tools that are being applied, and also much more important than the principles, values, or consequences, risk frameworks that you're applying. Doing that is inherently difficult and uncomfortable, which is why a lot of people really don't like doing it. This is a part that I'm currently researching further on how to accommodate the difficulty and discomfort within organizational structures better. That's it. Thank you. And if you want to look up anything of the parts that I've referenced, here's a resource list. This is a point where you want to take a picture. That's it.